My name is Elara Vance. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a content strategist for a nonprofit focused on economic empowerment. I spend my days crafting messages about financial literacy and breaking cycles of poverty, but nothing prepared me for the day I walked into my sister's kitchen and saw her, my vibrant, usually optimistic younger sister, hunched over the counter, meticulously sorting a small pile of loose change. Her baby, Leo, was in his high chair, fussing softly, his little hands reaching for a brightly colored plastic spoon that lay just out of reach. Sarah's face was drawn, her brow furrowed in concentration as she counted out dimes and quarters, her lips moving silently. It was for baby food. A single jar of pureed carrots sat on the counter, waiting. My stomach dropped. I knew Sarah and her husband, Mark, had been having some financial struggles, but this was different. This was a raw, humiliating display of desperation. I wanted to rush forward, sweep the coins away, and buy her a whole cart full of groceries, but I froze. The shame radiating from her was palpable, a silent plea not to be seen. What I didn't understand yet was that this wasn't just about being short on cash. It was a symptom of something far more insidious, something that had been slowly suffocating my sister, and I was about to find out exactly why. Sarah and I had always been close, despite our 2-year age gap. She was the dreamer, the one who saw the best in everyone, sometimes to her detriment. I was the pragmatist, the one who triple-checked the budget and read the fine print. Our parents, both teachers, had instilled in us a strong sense of financial responsibility, emphasizing saving and living within our means. Sarah, however, had a tendency to be swept up by grand visions, especially when it came to men. That's how Mark entered our lives. He was charming, handsome, and full of big ideas. When they met 5 years ago, he was a consultant with a vague portfolio of disruptive tech startups. He always talked about the next big thing, the imminent breakthrough that would make them rich. I remember our first dinner with him. He ordered the most expensive wine, then subtly suggested Sarah split the bill, even though it was ostensibly his treat. A small detail, but it stuck with me. Sarah, of course, was smitten. She loved his confidence, his belief in a bigger future. I saw a man who talked a good game but seemed to lack any concrete plan, and more importantly, any steady income. I voiced my concerns gently, suggesting Sarah be careful, but she brushed them off. "You're just being you, Elara," she'd said, always looking for the catch. They married a year later, a small, intimate ceremony that Mark insisted on keeping low-key, due to his busy travel schedule. I suspected it was more about saving money, or perhaps avoiding scrutiny from Sarah's more financially astute relatives. Sarah, ever the romantic, saw it as an intimate gesture. She had some savings from her years as a marketing coordinator, and Mark convinced her to invest a significant portion of it in one of his ground floor opportunities. He assured her it was a sure thing, a way to secure their future. I remember seeing the paperwork, a complex document full of jargon, and feeling a familiar unease. When I asked Sarah if she'd had a lawyer look at it, she just waved her hand. "Mark knows what he's doing, Elara. He's an expert." The first real crack in my sister's perfectly curated facade appeared about 6 months after Leo was born. I met her at the grocery store, pushing her cart, looking utterly exhausted. At the checkout, she pulled out her debit card, and it was declined. She fumbled for a credit card, which also failed. Her cheeks flushed crimson. "Oh, must be a glitch," she mumbled, quickly pulling out her wallet. That's when I saw her start to dig through the coin purse, her fingers trembling slightly. She paid for a single can of formula with a handful of change, leaving the rest of her groceries behind. I immediately offered to pay, but she stiffly refused. No, it's fine. Just a temporary thing. Mark's business account is being updated." She even managed a strained smile. I bought the rest of her groceries behind her back and had them delivered to her house later that day, pretending it was a surprise gift. Over the next few months, the temporary glitches became more frequent. Sarah stopped suggesting we go out for coffee or lunch. When I visited, the baby's clothes were often worn thin or clearly hand-me-downs that were too big or too small. She'd always been so meticulous about Leo's appearance. One evening, Mark joined us for dinner at Sarah's place. He was in full swing, describing a new, AI-driven real estate platform he was developing. He needed another seed investment to get it off the ground, a substantial sum, he said, to leverage their existing assets. Sarah sat quietly, picking at her food, her eyes darting between Mark and me. She looked like a ghost. When I asked about her marketing job, she said she was taking a break to focus on Leo, but her tone was flat, devoid of her usual enthusiasm for motherhood. That detail mattered later. Leo's first birthday party was a particularly stark example of the growing disparity. Mark insisted on a lavish party, inviting dozens of his business contacts. Sarah, however, was clearly doing all the work. She spent days baking the cake, making all the appetizers, and decorating the house by herself. She looked utterly drained. I watched her slip into the kitchen at one point, pull out a small, worn envelope from under a stack of napkins, and carefully count out a few crumpled bills. She tucked them into her purse with a furtive glance, as if she were committing a crime. Mark, meanwhile, was holding court in the living room, laughing loudly, his arm around a potential investor, completely oblivious to his wife's quiet struggle. The brightly colored plastic baby spoon I'd bought for Leo's cake smash sat unused on the table, overshadowed by the expensive platters Mark had insisted on. I started trying to offer practical help. Sarah, I said one afternoon, I've been going over my budget, and I realized I have some extra room. Why don't I help you set up a simple spreadsheet? Just to keep track of Leo's expenses, for tax purposes. I tried to make it sound casual, helpful, not intrusive. She stiffened immediately. Oh, no, Elara, that's sweet, but Mark handles all our finances. He's really good at it. He says it's better if one person manages everything, for efficiency. Her voice was tight. Later that day, I received a text from Mark. Hey Elara, appreciate you looking out for Sarah, but we've got things handled. No need to interfere with our financial planning. The message was polite, but the undertone was a clear warning. That's when the numbers stopped looking accidental. It wasn't just Sarah being bad with money or Mark having a string of bad luck. It was a pattern. The way Mark always had a new opportunity that required money, the way Sarah grew increasingly isolated and defensive, the way she was clearly struggling in secret. I started to research financial abuse, and the checklists I found were chillingly familiar: controlling access to funds, making one partner feel guilty or incompetent about money, demanding detailed accounts of spending, isolating them from supportive family. My sister, the one who always saw the best in people, was trapped. I began to gather my own silent documentation. I noted dates of Mark's investment opportunities he'd mentioned, the times Sarah had been short on cash, the increasingly threadbare state of her and Leo's belongings. I didn't have access to bank statements or legal documents, but I had my observations, my memory, and a growing sense of dread. I cautiously spoke to our mother, who had also noticed Sarah's withdrawn demeanor and Mark's increasingly grand, yet unsubstantiated, claims of wealth. He always has an excuse for why they can't afford things, but he still manages to buy himself new gadgets, Mom had said, her voice laced with worry. Sarah just looks tired all the time. My mother felt helpless, but knowing she saw it too gave me a quiet resolve. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. My phone rang, and it was Sarah, her voice thin and choked with tears. Leo has a cough, Elara. It's been getting worse. I think he needs to see the doctor, but I can't afford it. My heart hammered in my chest. What do you mean, you can't afford it? Don't you have insurance? What about your emergency fund? I demanded, trying to keep my voice calm. Mark just needed some money for a critical business expense, she sobbed. He said it couldn't wait. He took what was left in my account. I didn't hesitate. I'm coming over right now. We're taking Leo to the doctor. When I arrived, Sarah looked utterly defeated, clutching Leo to her chest. His little coughs punctuated the silence. I scooped up Leo, bundled him into his car seat, and then turned to Sarah. "We're going to the doctor first. Then, we're going to talk. And I mean really talk, Sarah. No more excuses for Mark." At the clinic, after the doctor assured us Leo had a mild respiratory infection and prescribed some medication, I sat Sarah down in the waiting room. "Sarah," I started, "I've seen you counting coins for baby food. I've seen you struggle to pay for groceries. I've seen Mark take your money for investments that never materialize, while you go without. This isn't normal, and it's not okay." I laid out my observations, not as accusations, but as facts, as evidence of a pattern. I mentioned the research I'd done on financial abuse. Her eyes welled up, and then the dam broke. She confessed everything. Mark had drained her personal savings account, saying he needed it for seed capital for his businesses, promising to pay her back with interest. He had taken out credit cards in her name, maxing them out for his own expenses, claiming they were business costs. He controlled all their joint accounts, giving her a small allowance that barely covered essentials, making her feel like she was terrible with money and that he was protecting her from herself. He had convinced her to quit her job, isolating her further. He said it was all for our future, Elara, she whispered, her voice raw. He said I was being unsupportive if I questioned him. I held her hand. "He's been financially abusing you, Sarah. This isn't your fault." I told her about a lawyer I knew who specialized in domestic financial abuse cases. It was a long, painful road, but Sarah, with my mother and my support, began to reclaim her life. She moved into my guest room temporarily. Mark was furious, calling constantly, sending manipulative texts about how she was destroying their family and ruining his business. But this time, Sarah had a shield. I helped her gather the necessary documents, contact the lawyer, and start the process of untangling her finances from his. It was a slow, meticulous process of separating accounts, freezing credit cards, and filing for divorce. Sarah found a part-time remote marketing job, slowly rebuilding her savings. It wasn't easy, but she was finding her footing again. One afternoon, a few months later, I walked into my kitchen and saw Sarah sitting at the table, smiling as she fed Leo his pureed carrots. He giggled, batting at her hand with his little fist. In her other hand, she held the same brightly colored plastic baby spoon I'd bought for Leo's first birthday, the one that had sat and used amidst the chaos Mark had created. This time, it wasn't a symbol of quiet desperation. It was just a spoon, in the hand of a mother, feeding her thriving child, building a future one spoonful at a time.